Good afternoon. I am Saad Al-Aziz, the owner and head instructor of Semper Fortis Jiu-jitsu here in San Antonio, Texas, and here to tackle this week's question of the week. So this week we had a question which was, is an ego good or bad for your Brazilian Jiu-jitsu journey? And the complicated answer is it's both good and bad. Where it would be bad is if your ego is so big that when you train, you can't accept losing, and when you lose, a smaller person, defeats you, taps you out, chokes you out, and then you quit. Well, then an ego is bad. I have that happen a lot. Like I'll have big, strong guys. If a guy comes in, like I've had power lifters come in, I've had 300-pound plus guys, even a 400-pound guy, and they come in and once some smaller people start choking them and joint locking them, and they realize, man, their bench press isn't going to save them, they quit jiu-jitsu. They just never see them again. Or they'll train for a while and then they'll enter a tournament, and then they feel okay when they're training in here because they outweigh their training partners by 100 or 200 pounds, and then they go into a tournament and their opponent is just as big and just as strong or bigger and stronger than them, and then they lose, and then you never see them again train. So in those cases, ego is bad. Even with some of our pioneers in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you could see where ego was a problem for them. On our wall, we got Elio Gracie. He, in his super fight with legendary judoka Kimura, allowed Kimura to snap his arm twice, to just break his arm before his brother Carlos threw in the towel and said, okay, we're done. And it's like, well, there's nothing else to describe the fact that Elio would not tap other than ego. Ego was clearly a factor. And then you saw this with Elio's son Royler. He allowed Sakuraba to snap his arm. You saw Renzo Gracie in an MMA fight allow Sakuraba to snap his arm. So if your ego will not allow you to accept defeat and you take a significant injury from it, I would say ego is a bad thing. But, of course, Elio Gracie, Royler Gracie, Renzo Gracie are phenomenal jiu-jitsu pioneers, legends of the sport, and have done many great things. And so in those cases where they allowed themselves to take a severe injury, I would say ego was bad. But their ego drove them to get even better at jiu-jitsu, to, win these fights, take on these fights. When you're taking on fights like that, ego is definitely a factor. So if your ego makes you quit, I'd say, well, ego's a bad thing. If your ego does not allow you to respect the technique because you don't want to accept defeat and you take a significant injury because of it, I would say ego is a bad thing. But where ego can be a good thing is, you'll get people in here, and we've had people in here like whether it's Dayton, Cash, who come in and they train twice a day, maybe 3 times a day, and then work out and 6-7 days a week. They're just grinding, training, and they're going into these tournaments, and sometimes, usually they're winning, sometimes they lose though, and their ego sends them right back to the grindstone to work even harder to get ready for the next tournament. And so in those cases, ego is a good thing. Ego is making you get better and better and better rather than quitting. So if your ego is making you come back to get even better, make you work even harder so you can win those championships or win those matches that you're looking to win, whether it's a tournament match, an MMA match, a street fight, or just sparring in here. You might come in here and it's like, man, every time I roll with, Joe, he chokes me out and he defeats me. I want to beat Joe. And so you come in and you keep training, you keep training, you keep training, and you get better and you get better and you get better. And if that drives you to one day surpass Joe, then I would say ego is a great thing for you. So ego, is it good? Is it bad? It's both. And nobody performing at a high level in any sport, no matter how humble they try to pretend to be, can honestly say ego is not a factor driving them. It's absolutely a factor. It's whether your ego is driving you in a positive way to constantly get better, to accomplish new goals, or whether your ego is driving you in a negative way, which would be quitting, taking catastrophic injuries because you don't want to lose, then I would say ego is bad. So every school says leave your ego at the door, but the truth is ego drives people. Sometimes it drives them to, reach the mountaintop of whatever they're pursuing, and sometimes it drives them to quit. So if it's driving you to get better, I say ego's a good thing. If it's driving you to quit, I say ego's a bad thing. All right, that's this week's question of the week. Thank you so much for the questions. And as always, if you have a question for next week, you can either comment below, send it to me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or see me in class, text me, however you want to send the question. Works for me. And then if you have any comments, feel free to comment below, and tell me your thoughts on, whether you think ego is good or bad, and whether it's good or bad for you, and what inspires you and what drives you. All right, that's it for this week. Talk to y'all next week. Ciao.